All right, so continuing on here. Let me show you this first before we go into it. So here's the scene view with the cutout, and I'm looking at the cube, and here's the shader test dissolve mine. I'm using the cutout shader that's in here somewhere, the cutout shader. But I want to look at the cube and look at its shader and its exposed stuff. So an albedo, a normal, an emission texture, a main texture tiling and offset. So not only can I tile the texture, but I can also undo that. I can also offset the texture, so I can move the texture, all of this settable. The cutout texture is a black and white, it goes from white to black in the center with grayscale in between. I believe this might be the default particle, something like that. And I have a cutout amount, which is basically the level in this grayscale at which I want to turn it transparent. So if I fiddle with this, 0.3, 5, oops. 5 makes it disappear, 0.5. So I can adjust where in this cutout I want it to disappear. The cutout can also be tiled. So I can tile this to 2, and now I get 2 cutouts, 1. And I can do this in the X, Y, and I forget why I've got the Z here. I don't think I need that one. Anyway, and I can offset that so I can move the where the hole is on my object. I have an edge color that's selectable from a normal color. I have an edge width that I can change, so the thickness of this red little bit, and also how intense I want the light color to be. And so this is the whole exposed part of the shader. This is the blackboard for that with the albedo, the normal, the emission, the main texture tiling, offset, and so forth. So I have slots for the albedo and normal textures, the emission that we'll use for the glowing rim, controls for tiling and offset of all the different textures, as well as the amount of cutoff and an edge width and a color. I use tiling and offset to define the UV of the 3 main textures, sending both albedo and normal directly onto the master. Emission I'm going to treat slightly differently, as that's what we modify to have the edges. We have 2 other pathways, one that produces the alpha clip threshold, which determines the level at which the texture becomes transparent. And this is sent directly onto the master. It's one of the inputs to the master, the alpha clip threshold. I use the tiling and offsets for the UV, the R channel of the cutout texture, and a step node with cutout amount for the level at which to make the edge. The cutout texture is a grayscale, so using the R channel is going to get something between 0 and 1 for my cutout. Note both the R channel and the step output are sent to other pathways that are going to modify that emission. So these things are being sent off to other places to do things. We can send the output to from one of these to more than two places. You can only have a single input to a node, but you can have multiple outputs from the node. With the R channel from above into another step, and the step output from above into the B of subtract, and subtract is like add, except it subtracts things. And the step limit set by adding the cutout amount and the edge width, and multiplying all of this by the edge color, and adding that into the RGB output of our original emission texture, which you may have noticed was black to begin with. And we send that on to the master emission slot. So the master itself has a slot for emission, albedo, normal, and emission. And the whole thing looks like this. It's pretty busy. There are two different pathways here. With a bunch of branches. It's quite complex, but relatively simple to understand once you follow it through. Incidentally, that idea of subgraphs are very easy to create. You simply sweep the nodes that you want to have included, right-click on it, and select Convert to Subgraph. It asks for a name and a location, and it stores it in here. So here's the cutout subgraph has been created by doing that. The interesting thing about these subgraphs is it has all of the input and output that the swept nodes had. Unfortunately, they're not labeled. So you often have to be able to open it. In my cutout setup, here's the cutout shader with sub nodes. So here's one of the sub nodes is my albedo normal stuff, and it has a main texture. It has two textures that are input, albedo, normal, and emission. And it outputs a bunch of stuff. None of it's labeled, but if I double click on this, it opens this and shows me what the inputs are and what the output is, the subgraph outputs. So often we have to look into these, but here's that node. So what I did here was make modules of two of the complex paths here with all of their inputs and all of their outputs. And so we kind of have simplified things. Here's the whole subgraph of one of the cutouts. I did the same thing with the moving shader graph with subgraphs. So I've got, I subgraphed this whole thing into the moving shader graph. Where'd it go? Here, moving shader graph. Moving shader graph. I collapsed all of that into this individual object here. I went in and made a copy of it. That was moving things in the Y. So I made a copy of that, called it X sign, and I changed which of the three components got added together. So in the original one, we were passing on the R and the B and modifying the G or Y. And in the other, this X sign copy, I'm modifying the X component and passing on the Y and the Z. And so I now have more inputs here, and my object will now wiggle in both directions, both the X and Y directions. I'm not sure I have an example. Oh, here, moving subgraphs. I think this works. Maybe this will work. Well, it's not working. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, he's wiggling sideways as well. I think that's it. Yeah, has an X speed, a Y speed, amplitude, and frequency, and an X speed, amplitude, and frequency. Let me crank up the amplitude here to 2. So it's going to wiggle both horizontally and vertically. So very cool and pretty simple to do with kind of a function. The subgraph. So this barely scratches the surface of what you can do with the ShaderGraph. The node library, there are over 150 different node modules. The language is extensible in the sense that you can make your own subgraphs, function like collections of nodes with specific inputs that you can use in a single node in multiple ShaderGraphs. They're easy to plug into an existing ShaderGraph. So I'm going to stop there, and I might come back and show you something else unusual. I'll end the recording here, and I'll see you all in class.